Okay, maybe.
Okay. Okay. Greetings to everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and thank you for making time to be with us today. We welcome you to this conversation, and our aim is to listen to different voices and perspectives on activism against gender-based violence. And this is more also to note that, assuming most of you may have noted that there's been a lot of orange in the last 16 days, and that is to actually make sure that we are marking the World Orange Day. And that is a campaign that seeks to spotlight the ongoing shadow pandemic on violence against women. As some of you may already know, and those that don't know, He for She is a UN Women's initiative that seeks to bring men on board to promote gender equality in partnership with women, building on the success that many women movements have built over many years. We are very delighted to be hosting this webinar in partnership with Unstereotype Alliance, which is a sister initiative at UN Women that seeks to eradicate harmful gender-based stereotypes in all media and advertising content. As we go ahead with the webinar, I'd like to request the audience to join the conversation online and share any thoughts that you may have using the hashtag He4She or hashtag 16 days, and to tag us at He4She. I'd now like to take the opportunity to introduce the moderator and speakers. We're very honored to have Shruti Kapoor, who is a founder and CEO of Sayfty organization. We are also very pleased to have Zozibini Tunzi, the Miss Universe for 2019, and Adam Baidawi, who is the editor-in-chief of GQ magazine in Middle East. Without taking any more time, I would like to hand this over to Shruti Kapoor, who will be moderating this conversation. Over to you, Shruti.
Thank you so much, Edward. What an honor and pleasure to be here on Human Rights Day discussing gender stereotypes and gender-based violence. So let me quickly begin by introducing our wonderful panelists here. I'm going to start with Zozibini Tunzi. As the third woman from South Africa to win the Miss Universe title, Zozibini Tunzi made history when she was crowned last year. Born in South African town of Solo, Tunzi was brought up in a village near her birthplace. She has two other sisters, and after completing school, Zozi graduated from Cape Peninsula University of Technology with a bachelor's degree in public relations and image management in 2018. Apart from her career in modeling, Zozi is an activist vocal about gender-based violence. As for her hobbies, she is a voracious bookworm inspired by her grandmother. So we had to get a book recommendation from you, Zozi, before we end tonight. We also have with us Adam Baidawi. He is an Iraqi-Australian writer and photographer. He is the editor-in-chief of GQ Middle East. His work has appeared in New York Times and internationally throughout GQ, Vanity Fair, Vogue, Esquire, CNN, and Rolling Stones. In 2018, Adam became the editor-in-chief of GQ Middle East. At 28 years old, he launched the print and digital edition of GQ and was the youngest ever editor. The magazine's first 3 issues received more than 25 million impressions, including an appearance on The Tonight Show. Adam was awarded Young Writer of the Year at 2017 Publish Awards for his reporting from Pyongyang, New York, and Parliament House. So a big warm welcome to both of you. As for me, I'm Dr. Shruti Kapoor. I am the founder of a grassroots organization called Sayfty in India. We work with women and girls, educating and empowering them against gender-based violence. And so I'm thrilled to be here. Without further ado, I'm going to get started with our first question. Now, we have all heard of the 1 in 3 number. 1 in 3 women will face some form of violence during the course of their lifetime. We have seen it. This is a statistics that has existed for years now in the gender-based violence space. And both Zozi and Adam, you come from very different backgrounds. Zozi, you grew up in South Africa, and Adam, you've lived in Australia and have experienced some parts of Iraq also. I would love to understand from both of you that where do you think this gender-based violence is rooted, and how do we even begin to dismantle this, change this 1 in 3 number? This means that every third woman that we are meeting, walking around meeting, has some story to tell us about gender-based violence. So I'm going to start off with you, Zozi.
Thank you so much, Shruti. For me, I think it stems from so many different places and for so many reasons. But I think the one recurring one that I look at is probably how the world is built so much on patriarchy. It's in the past, it's in today as well, today's society, it's built so much on patriarchy. And we look at things like belief in natural superiority. When we look at that belief in natural superiority, it's always, the male gender that's at the top of the scale. And so I think growing up where I grew up and for everyone in the world, that's how it has always been. The male is the head of the family. And so it really just gives that kind of influence that they can be who they want to be and act how they want to act sometimes. So I think that's one of the things. And secondly, social conditioning. Social conditioning is also very prevalent when we look at, gender-based violence today. Small things like going into a store to buy your child, clothing. If you look at boys' clothing and what is written on there, it's not the same as what you will see for a young girl's kind of clothing. You'll see things like strong, leader, for young boys, and you'll see things such as, maybe princessy or girly for girls, but nothing that has to do with like strong leadership and asserting ourselves as young girls in society. And so I think that kind of social conditioning that conditions boys to believe that that exerting their power and being violent to girls, means being a leader and being that way. And young girls being socialized to believe that they always have to keep their head down. They don't have to argue back to men. They don't have to be strong or, stand up for themselves. And so it's so many things like that. But I think most of them stemming from our world being so patriarchal and built on so many patriarchal systems. And so in order for us to dismantle that, I think we need to start changing our way of thinking, starting in our homes, starting in our schools. How are we educating children? How are we having conversations with our children inside the home? What is the relationship dynamic between the parents? Are they sharing their workload? Are they showing, kids that it doesn't always have to be, about gender? Are they teaching gender equality? Are we teaching things such as consent and boundaries at a young age? And so I think that's how we start dismantling it. We start at grassroots. We start when they're young so that they grow up really to be these people that we are looking for them to be in society. So that is what I have to really say about that. It's that social conditioning and it's that belief in natural superiority.
Wonderful. Very, very rightly pointed, Zozibini. Earlier this year when the pandemic started, he for she started the he for she at home, encouraging more and more men to take on the load at home and share it with women. I think, like you rightly pointed, it starts at home. It starts with the conversations we have at home with our children. I'm going to pass it over to you, Adam. Would love to hear your thoughts on the same.
I thought what Zozi unpacked about a patriarchal society is absolutely spot on and cannot be ignored. From everything I've learned, I think it's clear that we need to tackle this on two different fronts. And one front addresses the symptoms and the crimes and the violence we're seeing, and the other is to address the root cause. But the symptoms matter, and there's something we hear a lot about and we talk a lot about. And first and foremost, I think we need to ensure that we have robust and efficient justice systems all over the world and every country on planet Earth. UN Women's own research will tell you that less than 40% of women who experience violence seek any sort of help. And that's not 40% of women who experience violence go to the police. No, only 10% of those women actually go to the police. And that tells us plainly that women around the world do not believe that the legal system will serve them justice. And implicitly, it tells men and men who commit such violence that there are no consequences for such actions. It hints at this idea that these women who have already experienced violence and trauma suspect, in many cases rightly so, that the legal system or the justice system will only bear more trauma for them rather than justice. And that can't be ignored. No consequences and no justice mean that action can be perpetrated freely. As Zozi pointed to, treating the symptoms is one thing, but it doesn't get to the root cause. And I have to echo her thoughts. I thought they were very, very eloquent. And this idea of the way our society is built around gender dynamics, and what's rewarded and what is not rewarded, what is reinforced and what is not reinforced, has a large bearing on violence and gender-based violence. And I think that masculinity is in the midst of this long and painful adjustment, an adjustment that is very much overdue, and that we need to encourage and accelerate that adjustment. I mean, to offer a male perspective to the discussion, I can say that even for someone like me, who has lived a very fortunate life and a very privileged education, there were so many crushing pressures and false narratives that were embedded into masculinity. This idea that you have to be a certain way to be seen as powerful or successful or desirable or intelligent, and this idea that you can't show any weakness, that you have to swallow all of your anxieties, that you have to be theatrically assertive and speak over people and dominate people to be a man in our society, that's what rewarded. Now, we know all those things are verifiably untrue, and they're very outdated notions of masculinity. But we're only just starting to untangle ourselves from them, and we need to accelerate that. I've been fortunate to be surrounded by good friends and good family and people who have been willing to be patient with me and educate me. But there haven't been enough of those people, and we do need to create an environment in our societies, in our education systems, that encourage a broader idea of what masculinity is and what it can be, and dispel this notion that we have to be this hyper-masculine caricature to be respected or to be successful, to be embraced by society. We know that's untrue. We need to start to and continue to dismantle the systems that seek to reward that kind of behavior.
Absolutely, Adam. And I think both of you touched on a very important point about, having these conversations very early on with children. So whether it's at home, whether it's at school, talking about consent culture, talking about respecting women, teaching boys very early on that it is okay to express your emotions, to show your emotions, to cry. As much as women are boxed into gender stereotypes and held back, so are boys and men. And I think the sooner we start allowing people to break away from those stereotypes, the easier it will be to have conversations and remove the stigma and the shame around gender-based violence. So moving on to the next question, today about 3.8 billion people are connected via social media, and it has become absolutely impossible to attract and keep attention. Attention is the new currency in today's world. And, both of you are individuals. Zuzi, you won the Miss South Africa and then went on to win Miss Universe. So you have been in the public limelight, you have interacted with media, you have engaged with media in many, many ways. And today you have at your disposal a very large platform to talk to people, influence people. And Adam, you yourself, you are a content creator for media. As the editor-in-chief of GQ, you are deciding what content needs to be put out on media, whether it's social or traditional. So talk to us about what do you think is the role of media in addressing gender-based violence, in breaking down harmful stereotypes? And if you could give us one example from your own personal lives as to how you've been using social media or traditional media to talk about these gender stereotypes and how you're breaking down these barriers, that will be helpful. Adam, shall we start with you this time?
Sure, of course. I do think we need to, like, breaking down stereotypes means that those with platforms or those running platforms, operating platforms, need to be particularly thoughtful about the way we use them, perhaps considerably more thoughtful than we have been in the past. This is something myself and for the team at GQ Middle East, it's a very, very serious matter. We know the power that a magazine cover has, that a photo shoot has, that an interview has, and we have, with regularity, passed on perfectly sound opportunities with people that didn't align with the values that we want to promote. Because we know all too well that whether you're shooting someone for a magazine cover or you're casting a lead actor in a film or you're building conversation panels like the one that we're on or handing out awards, there's an implicit message that goes to society that says, if you are like this, you will be rewarded by society. I think I read earlier today from the Unstereotype Alliance that something like 60 or 70% of men and women believe that advertising does not reflect the world around them. So more than 2/3 of people don't believe that advertising is a fair reflection of the world. So what does that, like, I think we have to ask ourselves, what does that advertising, what does that media actually reflect? And I argue that it reflects our base instincts, it reflects unhealthy stereotypes that trigger social scripts to go off in our minds, like, you know, I need to be this, I need to weigh this much, I need to identify as this, I need to be this tall or this muscular or this skinny, whatever. And to me, the solution to all of that is to ensure and aim to and measure ourselves by how much we're embracing diversity in media. The man that is helming an action movie does not need to be a jacked 6'5" white dude, or the director of a global advertising campaign can and should be a woman of color. And I think that the more viewpoints and experiences and body types and ages and ethnic backgrounds and lifestyles that we give a platform to, the better. And I believe by doing that, we start to water down and dilute these really rigid, damaging, impossible to meet ideals and these impossible to meet and unhealthy stereotypes. I think that diversity will be our answer in terms of media.
Thank you, Adam. Zozi?
Yes, thank you, Adam. You said actually quite a lot that I would have wanted to say as well. But to add on to what you're saying is, I think we really need to be like responsible and thoughtful of the kind of content that we are putting out there, and that media is putting out there, because it is the biggest form and platform or medium of communication. You know, people don't watch as much television as they do anymore. You know, they are on social media. I wake up every morning. First thing I do is check social media. You know, what's happening, who's saying what. That's where I read my newspapers. That's where I read my magazines now. And so that is the biggest medium of communication. And, you know, the mind is such an easy thing to adapt to things. Media shapes our perceptions. It shapes our way of thinking. And so that's why we have to be careful on what we're putting out there. And it could be something that we think as simple as a headline. You know, as a magazine, as a newspaper, how are you framing your headline? Because that will steer the conversation and what people think about what you are writing. And so something like, say a woman was raped, how do you write that article? Do you say, you know, a woman who was wearing a short dress got raped, or a man raped a woman? Those are two different things, because once you write that headline in a way of trying to steer it into victim blaming, that's what people think. Because the first thing, you know, people will say is, why was she at a club? Why was she wearing a short dress? Why was she drunk? Which then alludes to people thinking maybe she deserved it, you know, type of kind of conversation. And that for me is very irresponsible reporting on the side of media. So if you want to write an article like that, maybe perhaps saying a man rapes a woman, because that's exactly what happened, and that changes the conversation, and that shifts our perceptions. And so it's small, it's not small, but you would think it is. You would think it's small just because it's a headline, but it's not. It really is shaping perceptions of how we think. And so that is how media is responsible and can play a part in making sure that we end this, gender inequality, that we end gender-based violence in the future. And for me, what I've been doing with my social media platform is I have a platform called #UniverseUnited that I started this year because of the pandemic. I was like, we're sitting at home. There's so much happening. Gender-based violence numbers are skyrocketing because people are in enclosed spaces with, their abusers and people who are violating them. And so really, I started this platform because I know that I have so many people following me, close to 3 million and maybe 3 million plus if I put all my social medias together. And those are the people, the numbers that I have paying attention to me. And so it's very important for me to understand the kind of influence that I have and the kind of change that I might try to make in playing my own small part. And so through my Universe United platform, bringing in people from different walks of life, from different platforms, both men and women, men as allies and men and women who have been through, these kinds of violences, and having that platform to have those conversations. Because, one of the biggest steps towards social change is awareness, is having these conversations. Movements such as the Me Too movements that allow women to come up and speak out, because women are scared sometimes of coming out to speak about their experiences because it's been said to be shameful in the past. That's how society has made it out to be. And so if we have these platforms such as the Me Too movement, where we see women coming out with their stories and speaking out, it does help, other women to speak out as well. And so there's so many ways that media can do this, whether it's through traditional media or through social media. There's just a lot that we still can do to make sure that we do our part in ending gender-based violence.
Absolutely. And I think one of the great things about nowadays is, when I was growing up, we didn't have social media, and so you really had to be an influencer or somebody, in the media to be able to have your voice be heard and to speak out against things that you believed in. But the beauty about today's times is that everybody has a voice and a platform, and no matter what cause you are advocating for, you can use your social media platform to raise awareness, to voice your opinions. So a follow-up question for both of you, Adam, and we can keep this really short, Zozi and Adam, is, now both of you are influencers, but also creators of media. And so there might be times when, especially Adam, you're in the magazine business where, you have to look at profitability, you have to look at readership. And so there might be instances when you are caught in a situation where it's about, hey, let's put out this content because this is more profitable or this will get us more TRPs. How do you balance that bit? How do you balance such that you're putting out the right content, but you're also making sure that the media that you are representing is profitable and sustainable, financially sustainable in some ways?
The GQ, the solution has been extraordinarily simple. The more diverse a range of subjects and people that we've covered, the wider our net has been cast. We've actually very much been rewarded for offering up more diverse perspectives and less rigid perspectives, and platforming people that perhaps wouldn't be typical GQ subjects in the Middle East. And so we haven't really been tested in a business sense. We've actually been very much rewarded. And I would encourage all media practitioners to consider that, because while it is the right thing to do, there's also very much a strong business case to offer diverse perspectives and progressive perspectives in a media platform. So I'd be very much encouraging everyone out there to at least experiment with it and embrace that wider audience.
Thank you, Adam. Zozi?
For me, I think at first when I started out, people would, send me DMs when I started speaking about things that weren't on brand with, beauty and beautiful things, because there's absolutely nothing beautiful about, speaking about social injustices. People are always trying to switch off and not face the reality of it. And so people would send me messages, be careful of, speaking too much about this and that, because certain brands might not want to work with you because of that. But I think, like Adam said, for most part, it's been very rewarding for me, actually, because if we look at the zeitgeist of where the world is today, people are actually listening now and trying to be more, fighting a lot of injustices. And so in that way, I have been rewarded as well, to be able to come into platforms such as this and to collaborate with brands who are in line, with the empowerment of women, and making sure that we do reach, a gender equal world. So for me, when I partner with brands, if a brand doesn't want to partner with me because I speak of such things, then maybe I shouldn't be partnering with that brand in the first place. If they don't want to be speaking about issues that are important in the world, so maybe they are really not worth, that partnership as well. But for most part, it really has been rewarding, because more people are actually willing to listen, because these are real stories happening to real people. And so people who are on a platform of influence, like myself, like Adam, are speaking about them, then they know that, they're not crazy. They don't have people gaslighting them, acting like what they're going through is not real, or it doesn't happen to other people, because it happens to everyone. And so the more people of influence speak about it, the more it becomes real. Unfortunately, that's how the world is today.
Yeah, absolutely. And it also, gives people a sense that no matter how big of an influencer you are also real, and you have emotions and you have feelings and you stand for things and you have a voice that you're using and your platform that you're using. Wonderful. Moving on to the next question. So, today we are here as part of the He for She movement, the He for She conversation. And this movement really aims to engage men and boys for gender equality. So, what do both of you think is the role of men in eliminating gender-based violence? And Zozi, we can start with you.
I think for me, when I look at allyship from men, I think of, accountability. I think the biggest role that men can play is accountability, whether holding themselves accountability or those around them accountable. Because I think that's the one thing that we are missing. Because like I said, you see a story coming out of violence, and the first thing that people do is to jump in trying to hear, both sides of the stories. Well, what did she do? Did she maybe deserve it? Why was she there? Why did the fight break out? And it's things like that I think men can really help us in championing, ending violence by holding each other accountable, by holding themselves accountable. Again, it goes back to conversations. What kind of conversations are you having at the bar? When you're having a barbecue at the back of your yard with your uncles, with your friends, what is the conversation going on around there? When you see problematic behavior, are you calling out that problematic behavior, or do you keep quiet and pretend like you don't see what's happening? Because sometimes, and as much as just because you're not doing it, your brother might be, your uncle might be doing it, your son, your friend. So it's things like that, calling people out. Accountability for me, I think, is the biggest thing that men can help, because believe it or not, there are still men out there who really and truly believe in a gender equal world, who wouldn't hurt women. But it's also, we really do depend on them as well to try and help us and to bringing more men onto the other side by holding them accountable.
Absolutely. Adam?
I again have to echo Zozi, like the bar for strong allyship from men on this matter is extraordinarily low. Like, so you can do so little and be such a huge help, and historically men have not been a help. And I think when Zozi touched on accountability and calling people out, that's exactly it. When you are in a position of power, which men are by default walking through the world, we are greatly advantaged by society as it is currently structured. You have to remember that you have that, and you need to be using it for good. And something that I've been working on for years is just a willingness to be uncomfortable in conversations. Really what it comes down to in these microaggressions we can see in conversations, whether someone makes a lewd comment or a comment that doesn't reflect the kind of society we want to live in or our own values, that comment might come from someone you love or someone you respect or someone you admire or someone whose approval you want. And a willingness to be uncomfortable, even just a small step at a time, can make a huge difference, because that social rejection or that social pushback can have a huge effect on that person that made the comment, but also everyone else surrounding you. And if the very minimum we can do as men in a struggle that sees women experience violence and many women killed, if the very least we can do is be willing to make ourselves socially uncomfortable, I think that's a bar we can meet. And it's a really good challenge that every person can give to themselves, because it can make a huge difference in our social circles and our wider communities. I think that men are overwhelmingly the perpetrators of gender-based violence, and so the role we have in eliminating it is substantial, and it's non-negotiable. Something else I've been noticing is that I think a lot of men are mistaken into thinking that allyship is kind of all or nothing, or that either you're an angel or you're a horrible human being that has no place in society. And they assume that this bar is so high that I couldn't possibly meet it, so why should I even try? But I think that you can exercise your power for good in everyday life. It can be as simple as, I know a lot of people like to poke fun at it, but it can be like reposting something on Instagram and sharing a link, or sharing resources, or amplifying the voices of women around you. It can be challenging friends or relatives who maybe make light of gender-related violence or excuse it. And for fathers, it's just raising sons that know that they can exist in a world that masculinity is not a one-size-fits-all thing, that they can have a different set of values and behaviors, that they're individuals, that there's room for empathy and for weakness and for reflection and for asking for help and articulating your problems or voicing your anxieties. And if we can encourage these behaviors and look to socially push back against the other behaviors, I think that all adds up, and that is a help.
Beautifully put. Definitely.
Yeah, Shruti, can I come in?
Yes, absolutely, Adam. Edward, please.
Yeah, I've been listening to things this, and it's really interesting. And what Zozi was talking about as men as allies, and it's I think based on my own experience, is that recognizing that addressing issues of gender, and especially being a man, is actually going against the norms, and sometimes it can be actually quite difficult. So I also do think that as men get involved, it's also important for men to be supported by other men, because you could be in a situation whereby you are challenging a situation and you are almost you're constantly the lone voice in challenging an issue, and over time you can get tired. And so what I'm saying is that it's also for men to support other men who are challenging situations. And many times in my life I have been in a situation where I'm challenging an issue, and sometimes it's perceived as those ideas that you're talking about, they are actually not in our culture. That's a very Western idea, when actually it's really not. It's about the real situation that is on the that you're addressing. For example, if you see in a workplace where a man behaves in a certain way that is sexually humiliating a woman, or makes a sexist comment in an environment where that culture has been accepted over a long period of time. So the moment you start challenging that, if you don't have people around you who support you, over time you might get your energy will dissipate over time. And what that calls is for other men to support other men in actually addressing and gender inequality issues, and for today's topic, gender-based violence.
Yeah, Edward, you touched on a very, very important point about culture and how culture plays a role. All of us here today come from varied backgrounds. I come from a South Asian background where mostly men are the heads of the household, right? And I believe so in Middle East and even in South Africa, that might be the case. And so it is extremely important to have these intergenerational conversations. So it is not just, that we teaching our children. It is also talking to our elderlies, to our grandfathers, to our grandmothers who are perpetuating gender stereotypes in their own ways. And I'm not here to blame them, but it's just, that's the culture they grew up with. That's the times they grew up with. But times are changing. And I think we must not forget that it is extremely important to have these intergenerational dialogues. So before we end today's panel, just, on a very last note, would love to hear some very quick thoughts on culture and the importance of culture coming from where you are, and how we can transform mindsets, because it takes a long time to change mindsets. And I hand it over to you, Dinan, after this. Zozi, do you want to take it over?
Sure, I'll go. So I come from South Africa, in most African parts, if not all of them, really, very, like I said, patriarchal as well. And so when we look at it, the way I grew up, growing up in a world where, the man is the head of the family, you're a woman, keep your head down, keep your voice down, don't do this, don't do that. And so I really want to echo what you said about, intergenerational conversations of, hearing what my grandmother went through, hearing what my mother went through, and looking at my life today. We are three women from different generations who have experienced, patriarchy in different levels of life. And so, there is a shift, and I feel like there can still be more that can be done. Culture is not stagnant. Culture changes, it shifts. And I don't see why, it can't shift in this regard as well. And so I'm really just hoping that we can accelerate it, because I was actually reading from UN Women as well, and how they said we have about 108 years or something before we can reach equality. And in Africa, I think we're looking at, I don't know, I forgot the number, but it's a crazy hundreds as well numbers. And for me, I think that's just ridiculous that I will not see, gender equality in my lifetime. And I'm such a young woman. It makes absolute no sense that I might give birth to a daughter who will probably not see gender equality in her time as well. And so I think we really, really need to accelerate it and move it as fast as possible, because it can be done. It really, really can be done if we all really just put our heads together and make sure that we push it as fast as possible. And again, like you said, through conversations with, different generations, making sure that we stop perpetuating the stereotypes.
Thank you, Zozi.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that there's a bit of a danger in us leaning too heavily on our culture and tradition as though it's something that doesn't evolve over time. We all have the power and the privilege and the ability, whether we know it or not, to be a generation that reshapes culture. Every generation reshapes culture in a particular direction, and we are very much entitled to look to evolve, reshape, and in some cases even remake it in a more beautiful image, in a more fair image as well. And I don't think we should shy away from that. And it's not a matter of respect or disrespect. It's just saying, just because things have been one way for a long time doesn't mean they've always been that way. And we have that power and responsibility. And I really would want to emphasize just how powerful the models that children see in a household are. The models and the dynamics that they see, even from the youngest of ages, can inform behaviors that last decades into our lives. We all probably remember traumatic or embarrassing experiences from our childhood, and those might have just been occurrences on 1 or 2 days. But the gender dynamics we see in the household will stick with us for life. And in a lot of cases, we're emulating them as adults. So we really need to understand the power that goes in there and look to embrace the things that make us who we are, but also take a step back at times and say, well, is that the healthiest thing to carry on to the next generation? And should we not question that and look to untangle ourselves from that? I think it's a very, very healthy conversation to have, and we should see it as our own responsibility to further our own cultures and respect our heritage.
Thank you to both, and over to you, Dinal.
Thank you so much, Shruti, and thank you both for, such a rich conversation so far. It's been incredible to listen to you. In the next 50 so we'll just end with a couple of questions that we've been fielding from social media as this conversation has been happening. So the first one is for you, Zozi, and someone has asked, people place a lot of emphasis on young people being the change for the future, but by then it might be too late. What can we as individuals do now to break down stereotypes?
Yeah, so I think a lot has been said through our conversation, how we can start changing, the places that we occupy, whether that be your home or whether that be your office or whether that be your friend. That's where, the change starts. You don't have to have the most absolute power in the world to make a change. It starts with you, because like I said, I'm sure you have a friend who has problematic statements that they make here and there. I'm sure you have a family member who's always, out of line when it comes to, these issues. It starts there, it's the calling out of the people. It's the educating yourself as well, because I know there's people who also don't know but want to be educated. Look out for those resources, whether you go out to visit UN Women website to understand what it is when we speak about gender equality, when we speak about gender-based violence, what does it mean? And so it could be a simple thing such as educating yourself first so that you understand what this is, and then educating the next person next to you. So that's how we really start changing societies.
I love that. And I think, like you said, sometimes these issues can be so overwhelming when we hear these massive statistics. And so, everybody has their own individual power and how they can influence the people around them. And that's, absolutely the best way to start. Adam, next question for you. So someone has asked a question. They say they're a GQ reader, they're a husband, and they're a father. They agree with everything that's been said, but they don't know what they should be doing. So we spoke about the role of men, but maybe to go a little bit deeper into that, what can this individual do in his role as a husband and as a father on this topic?
I think it's completely okay to feel powerless and overwhelmed and anxious. Like I said, sometimes we can kid ourselves into thinking that there's this hugely high bar to allyship and there's no way we can affect the problem. And it's okay to feel that way at the start, but I would just say to remind yourself that in the way society is structured, you have a tremendous amount of privilege as a man and power to exert for good. And don't underestimate how much your everyday actions affect the people around you, the community around you, society around you. Look at the individuals who have been, for the most part, extraordinarily underprivileged in society, who have fought for what's right and helped to reshape society these past few years, whether you're looking at Me Too, Black Lives Matter. Like, if a collective of underprivileged people can fight for change and start to reshape society, then you have to understand as a man your individual power as well and look to harness that for good. I just remind yourself that whether it's through your conversations, the way you work, the things you emphasize on your social media platforms, the way you raise your son or daughter, just recognize that through small actions, you can have an extraordinary ripple effect in your family, your friendship circles, and your community. And just hold yourself to those values. Hold yourself to say, does this reflect my values? And does this behavior reflect the society I want to see around me? If not, what more could I be doing?
Absolutely. Thank you. Zozi, next question for you. Why is allyship so important when it comes to this issue?
Yeah, that's a very broad one in so many ways. But allyship is It's important because gender-based violence and the ill treatment of women is not just a woman issue, it's a humanity issue. And so that's why we need everybody on board. And that's why allyship is important. Because if we're going to be speaking about a gender equal world, we cannot just make it exclusive to women. Like, women are the ones who are being perpetrators to themselves, which most of the time that's not the case. Men are usually, the perpetrators in this case. And so I think if we start looking at it as, a humanity problem and not a woman problem, then we will understand why allyship is important.
Great, thank you so much. And so, Adam, we spoke a little bit about, just the timelines that we're all aware of. When we see reports, it'll take 100, 200 years. But let's imagine for a second, the world is free of stereotypes. Violence against women is no longer reality. What do you think the world will look like then? What do you envision?
Something I feel that is not emphasized enough is how damaging the patriarchy is to men themselves. Sometimes I think we mistakenly believe that it's a tug of war, and that men currently have power and women do not, and so this current paradigm is advantageous to men and serves them best. In fact, we're existing in a paradigm that is extraordinarily damaging to ourselves. It's damaging for men in that they are crippled with anxiety. They are moving through the world in a way that is increasingly unfair to themselves and to the people around them, and very often can put both the people around them and themselves in danger. I don't need to emphasize the male suicide rates. And just know that this current system favors nobody. It's not for anybody's better good. And so I would like to think that a world that's free of stereotypes and that has conquered gender-based violence is merely a world where every individual has the opportunities that they seek and can enjoy the life they wish to live safely and without discrimination or the fear of violence.
Dinal, may I also just add, the global cost of gender-based violence currently is about $1.5 trillion. So just think about that. All that money being spent on healthcare in various ways to address gender-based violence will be freed up for much better use and for greater productivity in the world. So, a lot of time when we think of gender-based violence, we think this is only a women's issue. But like both of our panelists have reminded us that this is not just a women's issue. It ultimately impacts each one of us in the society. And so a world which is free of gender-based violence, will be a beautiful world where relationships will be better, where dating will be better, where consent culture will be better. So it has huge ramifications in the world.
Yeah, it does. So many ripple effects positively. Okay, last question for both of you. So audience member has asked, if I should take away one thing from this session, what should it be? So Zozi, maybe you can kick us off.
I think if you can take away anything is that you have the ability to make the change as well. I think we've said it more than once that you don't need, a lot of power, and you don't have to be intimidated by what's happening. You can make a change individually as you are. Sometimes I like to say it doesn't take, the government to govern. You can govern your own life. You can govern your own spaces as well by being, that change, by making that small change in the spaces that you occupy. So I think that's the one thing that we can take today, is that you are not completely powerless. You can do something about what's happening as long as you make the right connections, get the right information, put out the right information out there, whether it's through people you are chatting to in your circles or whether it's through social media. What kind of content are you putting out there for people to consume? I think that's the one thing that people can take away today, that you are not completely powerless. You too can make a change individually.
Man, I don't feel right adding anything after that. So you put it perfectly. Nothing more needs to be said.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, both. So that brings us to the end of this he for she conversation. Thank you so much to both of our incredible panelists, and to Shruti for moderating, and Edward for joining the conversation also. In the last final minutes, would like to invite you to make any closing remarks. Zozi or Adam, anything further to add from your sides?
First, I want to thank you so much for having me on this panel. I always love to lend, my voice where I can, because I do believe that we are, all in this world for, a greater purpose than just ourselves. And so I always find it important to use my platform for such. So thank you for that. And secondly, you asked me for a book recommendation, Shruti. So I'm going to take this opportunity to do that because today is also Human Rights Day. I think if we're going to be speaking about human rights, it would be completely missed opportunity for me to not speak about, Black Lives Matter and where we've been throughout this year, because I think that is one of the biggest humanity issues that we faced in the past years, especially this year. And so I will recommend Just Mercy by Brian Stevenson. If you want to get a little bit of understanding on what systemic racism is, and you don't know what it is, reading that book can really enlighten you here and there about what it is, what you can do to make sure that you lend your voice and you play your part as well in ending, systemic racism across the world. So yes, that is.
Thank you. And I also want to remind, I think GQ Middle East recently took out a book list on for men. So addressing toxic masculinity, it has some great resources. So look over that also.
And I want to thank HEV for the opportunity, and I'm very grateful for the work you're doing.
Thank you so much. Shruti or Edward, any final remarks?
No, I think I just want to reiterate what everybody has said, that each one of us has the power to bring change. And I think a lot of people ask, where should we start from? Start from yourself. Ask yourself, do you have zero tolerance policy towards gender-based violence? And start from there. Those small WhatsApp messages, the jokes, the rape jokes that we all laugh at, let's all start with ourselves. And I think if we start with ourselves, we'll be able to eventually impact and, change mindsets of the closest ones that we are with. So yeah, I think each one of us has the power to bring about the change when it comes to ending gender stereotypes and addressing gender-based violence.
Yeah, and from my side, it's just remembering one of the most influential people that I've worked with. At one point, I worked with a lady by the name Professor Wangari Maathai. She's from Kenya and who was the 2004 Nobel Prize winner. And in many conversations that I had with her, I do remember her saying, and this is more so important because today is the Human Rights Day, is that human rights is not something that is served for you on the table. You don't wait for it to be served on the table. You've actually got to do something. You've got to go out there and demand for those rights. If you look at all what is enshrined under the UN Human Rights Charter, everything is in there. If it was just so easy because it's written in books and documented, it would have been very easy. But the reality of our times is that you've actually got to do something to go and demand and get the rights. And I think that is exactly what we've been talking about here, saying and talking about what the role is, each one for us around our environment. And that is what it's about, doing something about it, because it's never going to be served on the table for you. Thank you very much, Dinal, for organizing this. And thank you, everybody, for making time for this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Shruti. Thank you to all of our audience members. And if you've been able to join online, you'll receive a link to the recording of the session, and it will be on our YouTube channel shortly afterwards as well. So final thank you, everybody. And we look forward to seeing you all at the next He for She conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.